You see the, look. I put it as just a, okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to 1,000 Ways. 1,000 Ways is where we are on a quest to discover the 1,000 ways that Rumi said there are to kiss the earth. A quest that happened centuries ago. That's what we're going to be working on. Today we have a fascinating speaker who is going to help us to discover one of the 1,000 ways. Dr. Heyland, thank you for coming on the show.
Nice to be here. Thank you, Alan.
Now, my pronunciation, is it Heyland? Is that the correct way, or Highland?
Well, it's Heyland, but I respond to both because it's, you know, it looks Heyland, but it's actually pronounced Heyland. So no
Highland.
worries.
How I'll remember is like Highlander. There is only one. So
That's right.
Okay, there you go. I'll remember that. So
Good.
Dr. Heyland is he is a very educated man, very smart man, very caring man. He is in terms of, like, I'm a little bit of a do-gooder. Do you ever take any martial arts there, Dr.
No.
Heyland? No? Okay, well, in martial arts, you get the different belts for different degrees
Oh,
and
yeah.
that kind of a thing.
Yeah,
And so I'm kind of like maybe a green belt with a blue stripe, you know, somewhere is kind of halfway, that kind of a do-gooder. But Dr. Heyland is he's like a black belt, 3rd degree Dan do-gooder guy. Wow, I tell you. And he's also a fellow of the College of Physicians and Surgeons, correct? Is that what it is?
Yes.
And a fellow is somebody whose personal development, ongoing education is at a much higher level than than somebody who is a doctor but doesn't do that work. Is that accurate?
That's fair. Yes.
That's fair? Okay, good. I know in other disciplines, that's how it works. Fellows are distinguished because of the extra volume and time and energy they put into their professional development, their ongoing education. So I met the good doctor, and we were chatting about a service that he has called Planwell. And then there's another level to that. But why don't you talk to us, first of all, about Planwell? Oh, damn, I forgot to do one thing. You go ahead and talk. I'm going to fix it.
Okay. Well, first of all, Alan, you can call me Daren. And second of all, I'm really delighted to be on your show. Thanks for engaging me in this conversation about Planwell Guide, because it's something that I'm passionate about, and I'm very happy to do anything to help, you know, get the word out and help people prepare for serious illness. And oh my gosh, it couldn't be more timely, given what we're facing with COVID-19 amongst us, and actually, you know, developing and getting worse over time. So I'm a critical care doctor, and I have worked for many, many years in a critical care environment where we're, you know, making decisions about the use or non-use or the withdrawal of life-sustaining treatments. These are life and death decisions. And you can imagine that if you were super sick, you wouldn't be able to participate in decision-making with me, Alan, and I would have to call her your good wife or another person you designated to make decisions on your behalf. And my lived experience was that many family members that are called upon to step into that space are stressed by the experience of having to make these life and death decisions with us as doctors. And of course, we don't want to make them by ourselves, because then, well, we don't know you. And so we don't know if we'll be doing the right thing by you. And so we need support and input from the people that do know you to make those medical decisions. And so I realized that a lot of that stress could be mitigated or attenuated or reduced if there had been some planning beforehand, if there had been some conversation beforehand with you and that person that's going to make decisions for you. We call them the substitute decision maker. So that's what Plan Will Guide is. It's about a tool. It's online. It's about helping that person think through their authentic values and informed treatment preferences. So when they get seriously ill, say like a COVID pneumonia, and there's a doctor, a critical care doctor like myself, or an emergency room doctor, and they're asking you questions and they're trying to engage you in decision making, you're ready and you know what to say and how to advocate for yourself. Or if you're too sick, then your loved one can step in and advocate for you and ensure that you get the medical treatment that's right for you.
Uh, that and it is a great service. I went through it myself. I think this is going to help thousands, tens of thousands of people. So I'm a big fan, Daren, and I certainly want to do anything I can to promote this great service, because I agree entirely that, man, and by the way, here's the way I perceive it. We are not really talking today. You were not talking about life and the end of life being near. We're talking about the end of your life being decades away. In terms of COVID-19, I think the big value is, I believe, and you can correct me if you're wrong, is us flattening the curve, us doing anything to prevent us from getting coronavirus or spreading coronavirus, flattens the curve, so that another thing that our medical professionals don't have to do is have a problem with scarce resources. They've got 50 ventilators, they got 51 patients. What do they do now? Is that a fair statement, Daren?
Yeah, there's a couple of ideas in what you're saying there, Alan. So if I may elaborate on some of them. For sure, our first hope and desire is that we can prevent the spread of the virus, the dissemination throughout the community. So that curve you're referring to, flattens and eventually the virus goes away. But part of my thinking, Alan, is that we need to hope for the best. That's the best outcome, is that we have very little perturbation in our society with COVID, that very few people get it. There's not very many deaths, et cetera, and it all goes away. Hope for the best. But from a critical care doctor's point of view, planning for the worst will be helpful, not only to yourself, but to the loved ones around you. If and in the event that you do contract COVID, again, what is it? 80% of people will do fine, will be able to survive. They should self-isolate. They could probably even stay home. They don't need to go to hospital. But then, 15, 20% of people, particularly if you're older or if you have significant heart or other comorbidities, you may have trouble breathing. You may have trouble managing with the fever and the unwellness. So you go to hospital, and then, a good portion of those will go into respiratory difficulties. There'll be questions about, should we put this person on life-sustaining treatments? And that's, for some people, it's a no-brainer question. Why wouldn't you? But what people don't realize is that the therapies that we use in intensive care are what we call supportive measures. We don't have cures. We don't have switches to flip that take the disease away. And so whilst we put you on machines and we wait and hope that the underlying disease goes away, if you survive, you're left in a very weak and debilitated state, physically and mentally. And for some older people, that could be, worse than death. have you ever heard or have you ever thought yourself that, I'd rather die than be dependent on others and in a nursing home. So for my 91-year-old father-in-law who was in a senior's residence, that's kind of his framework. And so if he got COVID pneumonia, he would not want aggressive treatments. And so it's important for him to be able to verbalize that, to be able to interact with the doctors. It'll make it easier on the doctors and easier on us as a family if he's thought this through, he's been through the planning process, and he knows what he wants. He's able to verbalize it, and so we make good decisions. Now, let me just give you one more example, Alan. And then it'll be a segue into not having enough ventilators, which was another sort of point you raised. And that is my father, who is in his 80s. He's got some chronic disease. So if he got COVID pneumonia, there's a high probability he could succumb to the disease. But he's been through PlanWell Guide's planning process. He's thought this through. He realizes he's caregiver to my mother. My mother has dementia. So they're living at home. He's caregiving. If he goes down, then my mom has a big problem with who's going to support her and look after her. And he wants to stay alive as long as possible in that caregiving role. So his preferences are quite different than my father-in-law. My dad says, I'd like a short-term trial at ICU therapy. I'd like to be ventilated. If it's a quick fix and they get me back out the door soon, then that's good. But he says, if it turns into one of those prolonged ICU stays, like many patients who develop COVID pneumonia, then, let's just change the strategy and withdraw the machines and focus on keeping me comfortable with the expectation then that I would succumb to the disease. And so he does express a preference for wanting machines at the end of his, or in the context of serious illness, COVID, I mean. But the reality is, as if COVID blows up like it has in other European countries or in China, we will have inadequate resources to manage all those people, with breathing problems. And this is a really important conversation we need to have in society, because, how do we want to use those limited resources? And how do we want to make those decisions? Do we want just healthcare decision makers alone, or just doctors alone, to have to bear the stress? I'm just getting, can you still see me, hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you fine. Yeah, no
okay,
problem.
good. I just had a flitter of my internet connection was unstable. So yeah, I'll just continue, but just signal me if there's a problem.
Sure.
So what I was saying, Alan, is, we need to sort of, as a society, dialogue about how we ration or limit the application of those limited resources in this construct of scarcity. And one way is to think about healthy years of life lost. If my 85-year-old father, who's not that healthy, does not get access to life-sustaining treatments and dies, there's very little healthy life years lost. In contrast, if a 30-year-old healthy person contracts pneumonia, goes into respiratory failure, but there's insufficient ventilators to sustain his life, well, then you can imagine there's a lot of healthy years of life lost. And so as a society, what's fair, what's balanced, what's right, likely we'll have to err on the side of saying, hey, we're going to have to not offer the treatments, life-sustaining treatments, to someone like my father, in favor of, someone younger, someone healthier. And that's a really tough thing to articulate, but it's something that we need to prepare for, so we can accept the reality of what might happen, in the weeks to months to come.
Right. And so for us, for the civilians in this scenario, then basically the better we are at keeping ourselves healthy and not spreading, potentially spreading, because we could feel fine and still be spreading it to others, right? Isn't that the way the incubation period works, right? So
well, I mean, there's a certain percentage that may contract the virus, and then you have on average 4 days before symptoms develop. And so in those 4 days, you could be spreading the virus. And then there's a certain percentage, and I've seen reports anywhere up to 75% of community dwelling people in Europe have it as a carrier, meaning they never develop symptoms, but they have the virus. And so that's one way it gets spread in the community, is we don't know we have it, and yet we're exchanging air droplets or things on our hands to other people. And so that's why almost these draconian measures are indicated, is to keep us physically separated from each other, so we're not, sharing air droplets or, contaminating ourselves and then transferring that over to someone else. And with all of that, I just, let me give one more point from a medical doctor's point of view about prevention. And that is, so we do all that, all those physical things, but I also want to advocate for, not stressing and worrying about all of what's going on. And even when I'm sitting here talking about, well, if you get seriously ill, you could die, and what kind of medical treatments do you want? We have to lean into that space to think it through, make a plan. But once you have a plan, speak to your family so they're aware, set it aside, and then you don't ruminate over it. You got to let it go. You got to take the peace of mind that comes from knowing that I have a plan, and then you got to focus on a positive mindset and look for the positive things that are happening in life, because chronic worry and stress will reduce your immune function. And of course, we need that kind of optimized to deal with the fact that if I do get exposed to the virus, I want my immune system functioning optimally.
Understood. And so what from a non-medical professional standpoint, what I think the value that I provide by being very diligent in not contracting the virus myself or giving it to somebody else when I'm a carrier, even though I'm not sick, is that I put way less strain on our medical system, and I don't put medical professionals in that rationing, in that ethical dilemma of who gets this treatment and who doesn't, right? So I think that's kind of the value that we as individuals do by being prudent. Like I go to town every once in a while, as minimally as I can, but when I do, I have something over my face so that if I cough, I'm capturing that spit, the virus stuff. And also I usually wear gloves. So again, and alcohol, so that way that I'm not spreading it, because I'm kind of, my basic analogy, the way I look at it, is that Corona has urinated in our pool. Our swimming pool is full of Corona pee. And so our job is to get the hell out of the pool, stay away from the pool. The professionals will get it all cleaned up and sanitized, and then we can come on back into the pool. Life will be all good. That's kind of the way, simple way I look at it. So.
I'm with you. I'm on the same page. And so again, primary strategy is prevention and hope for the best, that it just goes away. Secondary strategy is to, okay, if it happens, be prepared. And, here's some thoughts on, how to prepare. So I do want to refer listeners to our website, www.planwellguide.com. Planwell Guide's all one page. Just the other day on Monday, I posted a blog on there with several things to think about, things to consider, that if you were to become seriously ill, if you were at risk of dying, then you've done those things. You can have that peace of mind knowing that your plan's in place. I just remembered, Alan, one other point from something you said earlier, that, some listeners may feel like, oh, I've been to the lawyer, I filled out the forms, I've done my health planning. Or some people may be sophisticated enough to know or to have heard the word advanced care planning or the Speak Up campaign. And I want to explain carefully that kind of planning that they've done is not that helpful to critical care doctors like myself. If you think you're planning your death, then you'll think in a certain way and you'll say certain things. And like, for example, if I hadn't, stage 4, cancer, and I knew that I was dying within a few months, then my wishes and my plans will reflect the certainty of my death. And so that's what the legal forms, the language they use, and that's what the Speak Up or the advanced care plans that most people use. And it's reasonable if you're dying. But that's the difference between serious illness like COVID pneumonia and stage 4 cancer. Stage 4 cancer, you have like a 99% probability of dying. Well, it depends on the type of cancer, but you know what I mean? Like there's a higher degree of certainty. If you get COVID pneumonia, depending on your age, and well, we don't really know actually what those prognostic factors are entirely, but let's just say for argument's sake, you've got a 50% chance of dying, which means you've got a 50% chance of probability of survival. And so at the point where I have to make decisions about, do I use the machines or not, we don't know what the outcome is. So you're not really planning your death. And that's the big take-home message from our dialogue, is that you have to think about it differently to plan for serious illness. And that's why I created Plan Well Guide as a critical care doctor, where we're making decisions under conditions of uncertainty. The existing tools and approaches were inadequate or really flawed. And so, if you go through the planning process on Plan Well Guide, if you read my blog, you'll get a really good sense of the difference between terminal care or end-of-life care and the serious illness. And of course, COVID is a good example of a serious illness where there's a probability of survival, but there's also this probability of death. Likely you won't be able to voice your wishes and participate in decision makings. So you got to go through the planning process, share it with a substitute decision maker, and then you're prepared, and you can just grab that peace of mind and know that come what come, you'll be able to manage.
So for our viewers, I am not suggesting right now, excuse me, I suggest you go to Plan Well Guide, but don't think of it in any context with COVID-19. It's not for you and I, it's probably not applicable for COVID-19. Think about it in decades to come, what you might want to do if you get towards your days are running out and you're not going to be here much longer, what your decisions would be then. And if you go through it in that context, this isn't for today, this is for a end of life event that's going to happen in decades to come, and go through that process. It might be quicker, earlier or later, but if you go through that process with that context, I don't want this to be something stressful today that you're all focused on COVID-19 and now you start talking about death and this overwhelms you. But if you think about it in the context of a death that will occur, let's say a great death after a great life that occurs decades from now, go through that Plan Well Guide. I think it's an awesome tool. I did it. I very much enjoyed it. It was, some of the things were hard. The video about the CPR part was like it's not mandatory, but it's a good idea that you go through it. And then when you do, and you see, oh, well, here's the stats on surviving it and surviving at the same level of functionality. And here's probably what's going to happen though at a much reduced level of functionality. And so I think it allows you to really think through what would be the right decision you would make if you could make that decision at that time. And then you're sharing that. In my case, I shared it with my daughter and my wife and said, here's my plan. And basically, I'm kind of saying, if I get to a point in my life where I can't do anything that I enjoy doing, and I can't be of any value to anybody else, really, there's no point in me being around anymore. Then just like, let's call that good, punch the ticket. It was a good run, and that's over. So it's a great tool. Did you want to chat about the CPR thing? The extraordinary measures, let's call it that. When you show me a picture in your ER room with the 87 monitors and lights flashing and horns beating, it's like, wow, there's a lot of stuff going on there.
Yeah, and again, from the hospital's point of view, one of the most frequent decisions that people are engaged in is, okay, if your heart were to stop, what do you want us to do? And so I don't know if the words cardiopulmonary resuscitation will have meaning to listeners, or CPR, but it's that process of when your heart stops in the hospital, are we going to come and do compressions to the chest, put the breathing tube down, breathe for you, and send you to the ICU and try to revive you, bring you back. Of course, if we don't do that, you die, right? Because we've said your heart has stopped. And so it's a very complicated decision, and yet we do it so poorly in the hospital. And some of our earlier research has shown that we're involving, people in the decisions without adequately, explaining, the options, the risks, the downsides, the upsides. And so and because sometimes our words don't adequately communicate, these technological interventions we're talking about, we created a video, decision aid, and that's what you're referring to. That's what you watch. There's about a 7-minute decision aid that gives you a visual as well as words on what this process of being resuscitated or it looks like, is what the outcomes are, what you should think about to help you, make that, develop your own preference of, is this right for me? And I think it's important that I stress at this point that just because you prefer something does not mean you'll get it. Don't equate that with an actual treatment decision, because in healthcare, we like to talk about shared decision making. And so you as a person, you bring those values and those preferences into the conversation. But then the doctor's part is to be able to analyze your situation, your disease, your prognosis, your chances of recovering, and whether this therapy is actually indicated. And so if indicated and if consistent with your disease process, and if your values and preferences make sense, then we put that together, we make a treatment decision that's right for that person. There would be some people where CPR wouldn't be indicated. So for example, if you had a devastating stroke and you're neurologically impaired and you're kind of like in that condition you described, just a few minutes ago, Alan, about something that would be worse than death for you, why we wouldn't really have that conversation, with you or with your substitute decision maker, because it's just not indicated. And so that's why I'm trying to say, just because you prefer something does not mean you will always get it, but you're preparing yourself to articulate to the doctor your values and preferences so that you can work with them to make better medical decisions, when you're seriously ill.
So if you spend 2 or 3 hours, I think it took me 2 hours or so to run through the Plan Well guide and watch the videos and answer the questions. At the end, it produces a Dear Doctor letter. Here would be my preferences, right? If situation A happened, this is the type of care I would want, right? If this is the possible outcome, I don't want that care. And not only have I had that Dear Doctor letter that I could actually give to my doctor, but I've given it with my family members so they know what my level of care is. Now, even the Plan Well guide is awesome. I encourage you to do it. If it's right now is not a good time for you, it's going to stress you out, don't do it. But at some point, this is a very valuable exercise to do. I think the other thing that's good about it, it kind of makes you think of your end of life, end of days, and then kind of look back and say, hey, what would, think like begin with the end in mind. Who said that, sir?
Stephen Covey.
Stephen Covey. Brother
Yeah.
Stephen Covey said, begin with the end in mind. So one of the things he has is a funeral visualization exercise, right?
Yeah.
You go through and say, if this is what the end of my life should look like, what things do I have to do today, tomorrow, next week, next year to get to that kind of end? So it's aspirational as well, doing that exercise. But even more important, go ahead, sir.
No, go, you finish.
I just was going to say, even more important is phase 2 that Daren is working on, which is your preparedness for your future report. So this is more like things you do today, things you can change today to get you the best result long term. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, and again, I like the segue that we're using of Stephen Covey's work, because that has had a profound effect on my life. And I'm part of a movement where we're trying to normalize that conversation about death and dying, so that we do lean into this space. And Stephen Covey sort of encouraged us to think about that funeral and what you want said, and where you want to be in life, what you want to have accomplished, how you want to be remembered, because those visions that you create for yourself then will motivate you and dictate what you do today, what you do this week, what you do this month. And so that sort of visualization, finding your purpose, your meaning, and then of course he did a lot of work on helping people plan, to realize those goals. And so I'm a disciple of that way of thinking ahead, creating that vision. What do I need to do today to realize that vision? Create a plan, make it happen. While I've been out sort of trying to encourage people to think ahead and plan ahead for their medical care, I've had my eyes opened and I've talked to a lot of people, and I realized that it's actually not just a failure to think ahead and plan ahead for the medical part of the future. But broadly speaking, people aren't thinking ahead and planning ahead. They don't have a will, or they haven't got an updated will. They don't have a financial plan in place, so they're not adequately prepared to sort of deal with the stress of what's happening economically right now, say, for example, or, retirement in the future. The number one cause of stress to Canadians today is financial. So there's either a lack of thinking ahead, planning ahead, or just an inability to muster those resources to prepare for your future. So when I realized that, I realized I needed to have sort of a different approach to Plan Well Guide. Our tagline had been to live well and die well, you need to plan well. But now I've revised that a little bit to say, well, to live well and age well and die well, you need to plan well. And really, Alan, no matter what age you're at, whether it's 29 like yourself or 59 like myself, we're all in training to become older people. And probably we all have in our circles, when you think of parents and grandparents, we know that they're like that. And people are living into their 80s and 90s. And gosh, what they don't realize, though, is the decisions they make today. What you eat, what you do, what you think today is going to influence the quality and quantity of your remaining days. And so how can I help people to think ahead, plan ahead more broadly? And so that's what you're referring to is the next iteration of Plan Well Guide, which has not been publicly launched yet. We're still about 3 or 4 months away from that. But I've done research to identify 25 different aspects of living. And this medical part that we spent the first half hour talking about is one of those aspects. There's 24 others. Having a will in place is another example of one of those items. Being at the normal weight, not being overweight, not smoking, not drinking, healthy eating, activity-based living, or 30 minutes of exercise every day. I'm just going through a list of some of those other aspects that if you do them today, then you're going to live long and live healthy and avoid disease and enjoy a high quality of life. And then, of course, if you do the medical planning, you'll have a high quality of death. And we've got some legacy planning concepts in there too, so that post-death, those left behind will have fond feelings and a good experience in your passing. So that's what the next iteration looks like.
Yes, cool. I think that makes so much sense. And you go through that process and you think about what you could try maybe tomorrow, next week, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of the things you try now that are fairly small make significant differences over time. I don't know if are you a meditator, Daren?
I'm new to meditation, actually. And to be honest, last year when I did this research, I found that meditation was one of those items that has scientific evidence that improves the quality not only of your physical health, but also your mental health, which is super important. And so I've begun that. I would say I'm beginner, but I've created content and strategies trying to help other people develop that for those in need. In the Plan Well Guide 2.0, there'll be a section on trying to help people increase the level of meditation and mindfulness. And yourself, is that part of your?
Yes. Yeah, it has been for a couple of years. And it was a very positive change, but a very small thing. It's like 15 minutes in the morning, right? So it's not that difficult at all. Deepak Chopra right now has a free 21-day meditation thing with Oprah Winfrey, I believe. And it's he's like a guru with meditation or mindfulness, right? But there's so many good teachers out there, and they are so generous with their time and provide guided meditations there's millions of free guided meditations that you could just hook on to say, hey, this one's about this topic, or this is the meditation to help you sleep, so you do this one at night. So it's a small change, but over time makes a huge, huge difference in terms of your health and well-being. So,
and again, Alan, I'm sorry to bring this back to COVID-19, but I can't think of a reason more important than today to sort of try meditation because it's one of those things that will still your mind, give you control over your mind, bring that sense of wellness back into your soul, rather than, I'm sure what's happening for many people, that rumination of worry, that treadmill of worry that goes on in their minds. And so strongly endorse what Alan's saying with respect to meditation as a strategy to deal with that stress. The other useful psychological construct is a positive mindset. And are you the kind of person that looks at a glass half full and says, are you half empty or are you half full? And this is something that can be changed. It's not intrinsic to you. It's something that you develop through life experience and personality development. But if you've ended up on the glass half empty side and you want to change into the glass half full side, there are psychological interventions that can help you shift into a positive mindset. And again, I think relative to what's going on in the world today, you can look at things very negatively right now and again, and that worry, or you can try and find, the light and the love and the gratitude of what's happening in the world and focus on that and let that sort of alleviate some of that anxiety. So just a couple of concepts for your listeners: the positive mindset, the meditation, and doing their medical plan and getting that in place so that you can have that peace of mind and worry less.
I think it's a great idea, something you can easily do. Another idea is that if you're on a group program, you probably, or you may, I should say, have access to an employee family assistance plan. Use those services. Employee family assistance plans, you have it through your benefit program. It's designed to help you. It doesn't have to be where you actually have any terrible problems or anything right now. I recently used mine, and it wasn't that I went to see Dee, very nice counselor gal. We had a great chat. And basically I said, hey, I think I got most things figured out. Here's kind of my plan. Here's what, my practices that I do, kind of a thing. Do you see any way to improve that? So we had conversations about that, and it was very valuable. And one of the things that prompted me to use that is I was talking to a counselor, and he was talking about going to his counselor. And I said, yeah, you go to counselors? And then It makes sense, right? It's pretty logical. If you're a counselor, you have to have somebody who is a independent person who can view your life from the outside of it and say, hey, great idea. Wait a minute. Have you thought of this? So I think that's a huge tool. Make sure you use that. Got anything to add to that, Daren?
Yeah, just an anecdote and a comment. My wife is the external critic that helps me analyze my life. But I had a conversation today, and I won't say with who, but just that, they were stressed out about what's happening in the world today and with employment and finances. And so I was just talking to her and I said, tell me what, you're concerned about. How can I help? And then near the end of the conversation, she kind of just relaxed a little bit and said, really appreciate, being able to talk this through. And even as I talk it through, I feel better. And so I'm just endorsing what you're saying there, Alan, about, encouraging people to seek help. It can be through, a professional counselor, but it can also be through a trusted advisor, a friend, a spouse, or whatever. But stress lives inside of you right now, and it's going around and around and around. And so to, engage in sharing that burden, processing it out loud, and finding whether it's a non-professional friend or, if needed, these professional advisors, counselors, psychologists, etc., that can help you deal with the enormous stress that many of us are under right now.
The fear is actually way worse than the disease may ever be, right? That's the reality of it. So, yeah. So, you're a medical researcher too, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So you know what I think you should research? Because I'm certain of this, but I have no facts. I've done no research. I believe that singing is an extremely beneficial activity for your heart and for your mind and your soul, and that it makes a huge difference in your life. I think that, the whole endorphins and dopamine, and there's a whole bunch of things, good things it does, but I don't know any of the medical research. Are you going to do that for me? Check that out and let me know.
I'm not going to commit to that. There are, like, in the rehabilitation therapy space, music therapy is a real thing. It's not my knowledge or expertise, so I will defer. And don't ask me to sing because I'm not good at it either.
Well, I think anybody can. Matter of fact, I'm taking this time where I'm at home more to actually I
Yeah.
up my training regimen. I doubled my training regimen because I'm in training for this potential new Olympic sport. Have you heard of that?
No.
Oh,
Do tell.
hot tub singing. There's a rumor that the Olympics are going to add hot tub singing. So I'm in training and I've just doubled up my efforts since I got the time now.
Well, unfortunately, the Olympics are well, I guess this might be a winter Olympic sport, maybe. Then,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
Summer Olympics was postponed.
Anyways, I'm convinced that's the case. But and actually, when you're talking about singing as a therapy, there's this wonderful video. I can't remember what the name of the video is, but it's basically where a gentleman goes into seniors citizen lodging homes and goes in and talks to the daughters of the people that are in there, the daughters or sons of the people that are in there, and said, what kind of music did your father like when he was a young man? And then he basically just goes and makes a soundtrack of songs from that era and puts the headphones in the person's ear. And there's one that's like a black guy. He's like 85 years old. He's just like all hunched over, not communicative. No one will talk. And they put the headphones on, and seriously, in like 5 minutes, he's bopping around and he's talking, and it's just like, boom, brought back all these memories for him. It's amazing.
Well, I really believe that, because with dementia, it's the cortical functioning that goes down, the parts of the brain that control thinking and executive function, memory, etc. But the emotional centers of the brain, are still active. The sort of the down midbrain is what we call it. And so that music taps into that and brings back emotions and brings back life. If you said to the same person, what's 2 + 2, or can you read this book, they wouldn't be able to, but they respond to music, which connects to that limbic system or that emotional centers of their brain. Highly endorse that idea.
Yeah. My plan is, I know about 150 songs. So even if I get dementia later on, they can just wheel me out in the hallway. I'll just sing all day. Then they would wheel me back and put me to bed. That sounds like a great life.
There you go. Yeah.
Now, you would know this better than I, but I have to believe, like, what's the Isaac, the quote you have on the Plan Well guide? It says about death is not a problem. Life is sweet. Death is not a problem. The transition is the problem.
It's the transition.
Transition's the problem. And I got to believe that actual dying, if there was no pain involved, it's really just kind of a shutdown of senses. It's kind of like if you're a very intense meditator, all you hear, all you experience is your breathing, right? Everything outside doesn't exist, right? You're not hearing anything else. You're not feeling anything else on your face. Well, I guess you are, but it's just basically those senses that are so quiet, then just dim and close, right? Your eyes grow dim and stop. Your hearing grows dim and ends, right? Your breathing becomes shallow and just, you have an exhale and that's the end, kind of a thing. So it's dying in a natural way. Doesn't scare me at all. Pain scares me, but dying as it would naturally unfold, I don't think that's too scary a thing, really.
Yeah. I had this conversation with my father recently where he said, it's not death that scares me. He has a belief in an afterlife that's very positive and warm. He's lived a good life, but he said it's the dying process, the process of dying that worries me the most. And like you just said, I don't want to be in pain or other symptoms. And gratefully, one of the great advancements in medicine in the last 2 decades has been the development and kind of entrenchment in the medical industrial complex of palliative care. Not that we're where we need to be in terms of having adequate palliative care resources for all, but we're way better than we were, 20 years ago, at least as I've, been in the medical practice. So, if you're fortunate enough to get access to palliative care resources or clinicians trained with the palliative approach, then they should be responsible for ensuring that you don't have pain or breathlessness or, other symptoms. That's the real focus when you're in that final trajectory towards, death and dying. But again, the trouble is, and this is why, we spoke earlier about the difference between end of life care and serious illness, because, if I had stage 4 pancreatic cancer and I was planning my death, I would want to have palliative care involved, and we would, talk about symptom management. I'd have the resources in place so that I could, make sure I had that pain alleviated, and then I go. But the problem with serious illness, again, is we're not planning your death because we don't know for sure if you're going to die. You couldn't recover from serious illness. And so it makes the trade-off a little bit harder. Let me explain what I mean by that. If you get COVID pneumonia and you want to live longer and live through it, then I'm going to have to use machines and put tubes down every orifice in your body and to try and support you through that. So that may add pain, or at least being uncomfortable, bedridden, tied down, restricted in your movement, restricted in your ability to speak for a period of time. So that's what the trade-off people don't realize when they say, oh, she's a fighter, she'll want to live at all costs. Well, it does come at a cost, not just financial. I'm talking at increased symptoms, increased pain, increased uncomfortability, and then you may be alive and in this debilitated state. And so that's why it's trickier decision-making to decide about what to do for serious illness than what to do when you know that you are dying. And that's why we developed Plan Well Guide to help people think through those issues and be able to verbalize or vocalize, what they feel is right for them.
Medical assisted dying is
Yeah.
is it kind of an extension then of palliative care? Is that what it is?
Well, gosh, that's a loaded question, because there are a lot of palliative care people that do not endorse or want to be associated with medical assistance in dying. To a layperson, yes, that's a reasonable way of thinking about it, that while I'm alive and got this cancer and I got all these symptoms early on in the course of my cancer, I want to see a palliative care physician. I want to have their expertise that looks at me as a holistic person and helps manage my symptoms. And then maybe as I get closer to the end, I'm thinking, oh gosh, I don't want to go through those final stages where it's just suffering. Therefore, let me reach out and engage medical assistance in dying or MAID. But some palliative care physicians would sort of not embrace that option, but would rather advocate that with good palliative care, we can keep you alive and symptom-free, or the best that we can, so that that's not necessary to prematurely, end your life. And so they stand in opposition to that practice. I don't know, maybe as we're getting more used to, or it's being more entrenched in our system, there's less of not obstruction. That's not the word I'm looking for, but they're not that supportive of MAID because it reflects sort of a failure of palliative care. Now, what I just said isn't universal. There'll be some palliative care physicians that it's part of their practice. But if you look at what's happening with some hospices, for example, where palliative and hospice are sort of working close in hand, they don't want to do medical assistance in dying in hospices because this is a place where people are coming to die in a natural and holistic way, not a premature. They're not administering death. They're alleviating suffering in the dying. And conceptually, philosophically, those are very different processes.
Yeah, it makes sense. They're, as you said, they're alleviating the pain and just allowing the dying process to happen naturally without pain, really, is what they're doing, right? So, yeah.
Yeah.
So, wait a minute. What time did you have to go? You said it's 6:17. What time were you done? Did you have to run at?
6:25.
6:25. All right, cool. Let's talk just a little bit about Just Serve. Just Serve sounds to me something pretty simple. If you see a need, you try and help. You just serve to meet that need. Is it that? Go ahead. Tell me about it.
Well, yeah, it's exactly the philosophy is there's and even now today with so much happening, there are a lot of unmet needs in society, and so volunteerism is a big part of our Canadian way of life. The majority of Canadians, to some extent, voluntarily give back to the community. There are numbers of organizations, civic, non-governmental, non-profit, even some governmental resources that require volunteers for their function. And so what Just Serve does is tries to be a sort of a web-based clearinghouse or a web-based repository where you as looking for opportunities to volunteer, you can go on there and see something you're interested in, pull it down, and then go and engage. Because one of the barriers to volunteering is, well, what would I do? What can I do? What opportunities are out there? And so we're trying to enable that matchmaking, if you will. If you as an agency have a need, you post it on Just Serve. If you as a person, looking for opportunities, you go on to Just Serve. So that's the essence of it, is trying to promote volunteerism, trying to make our community a better place. And it's all free, and it's all driven by myself. My wife and I run it in the city. It's sponsored by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. We're members of that church, but there's no connection to the church. It's a community-based resource. You won't even know if you go onto the website that it's actually a church-sponsored website. It's just something we're trying to give back to the community.
That's awesome. And it's like right across North America then, is that correct? Or
at least North America. I lack insight to know whether it's beyond that, but at least in North America, we're covering some communities. Like Lethbridge has Volunteer Lethbridge, which does more than just that sort of web-based repository. However, there is a cost to being a member at Volunteer Lethbridge. So, but we work in partnership with them. But so some communities don't have, a Volunteer Lethbridge type office. And so we provide a more valuable resource. Medicine Hat is a good example. They don't have sort of a clearinghouse like Volunteer Lethbridge is for Lethbridge. And so the smaller communities in Southern Alberta don't either. And so there we really play a large role in trying to be those matchmakers for the individuals looking for opportunities, the agencies, posting their needs.
and the people who go on there to find opportunities, they don't have to be members of LDS members.
No, right? Again, it's a community. Yeah, it's an open community-facing network or web-based repository of service opportunities. Anyone's free to use it.
Cool. That is a great service. See, that's why I say that you're like a third Dan black belt do-gooder. You're amazing. I'm like way down on the scale. Matter of fact,
I think you're overstating it, but I do appreciate the compliment. Thank you, Alan.
I actually think at one point I was a ne'er-do-well. And then I started hanging out with all these people that are doing good all the time, Rotarians and people in service clubs, and all of a sudden, damn, I'm a do-gooder now all of a sudden. How did that happen, right? So, yeah.
Well, if I could digress for a minute, one of those 25 items that I was referring to in the next iteration of Plan Well Guide is volunteerism. And I was amazed to systematically look at the literature and document the benefits to volunteerism. You'd be surprised that you live longer if you regularly volunteer. You have better health, both physical and mental. You know how as we get older, a lot of older people are worried about sort of keeping their marbles, and volunteerism, because you can imagine, you're meeting new people, you're being stretched in new ways, there's constant stimulation. So volunteerism is a easy and cheap way to stay active, to stay engaged, to stay cognitively sharp. And so, we've summarized all that literature, and it'll be available in Plan Well Guide in coming months. But yeah, a lot of positive benefits to volunteerism.
And it's really another way that you can kind of try on a different role, right? Even just to say, hey, I don't know anything about this. I'm going to give it a go and see if I can learn something by trying this volunteer role. And what are they going to do? Fire you? They're going to welcome you and say, hey, thanks for coming out and helping. You're going to learn something new. Maybe you find that this is another path that you want to take instead, right? So, yeah.
Well, and that's the two groups in society that volunteer the most are the older retiree. but also that really young person, that 18 to 25-year-old. And I think part of that is that trying on different roles, responsibilities, and sort of finding your way in life as to what you really want to do with your life. And so that's a tremendous benefit, is it gives you that exposure, that firsthand exposure to what it's like to, say, volunteer. We have a lot of volunteers in the hospital, so people are getting a better lens on what it's like to work in the hospital, be a doctor, be a nurse, be whatever. And so that it helps you build your career. It helps you build your networks. It helps you build your self-confidence, and that will be helpful for you long term, for example.
I can hardly wait for the research you're going to do about singing and how it aligns. That's just slightly above volunteering in terms of the value for you.
I might disappoint you on that, Alan. I'm sorry.
All right. Well,
I'd love you to close out with a song. Let's hear it.
I'm going to do it. Have you ever heard of Paul Thorne?
Sorry, no, I haven't.
All right. Well, Paul Thorne is a man who has had some life experiences. His dad is a preacher, and his uncle is a pimp, and so that's kind of interesting, right? But he's got some really, really interesting lived experiences, and he sings about them in his songs. So he has great lyrics. So I know a bunch of Paul. He's from Tupelo, Mississippi, and excellent performer. I've seen him live before. I got a whole bunch of his albums. He's great. So I'm gonna try a Paul Thorne song. But if you want to check out the real deal, paulthorne.com, just go there, buy everything he's got for sale. He's amazing. So this is, I think this would be a good one to try. Get you a healing from the bottom of your heart. Get you a healing. It's the only place to start. Forgive all of those who have ever done you wrong. Get you a healing, and we're loving from now on. Get you a healing for your body and your soul. Get you a healing. It's good for young, it's good for old. Fix all the problems with the people that you know. Get you a healing and let your loving show. Get you a healing by learning how to share. Get you a healing by showing that you care. Show them that you love them by really being there. Get you a healing like breathing fresh air. Get you a healing for your body and your soul. Get you a healing. It's good for young, it's good for old. Fix all the problems with the people that you know. Get you a healing and let your loving show. Get you a healing and let your loving show. Something like that.
Awesome. Good job, and great message. That was awesome.
Thank you. So it is, we've done our time. You got to get running. I very much thank you. I think you're doing awesome work. I want to be of value in helping you do that awesome work. So I would encourage you to let me know how I might help you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me on your program, Alan.
Thanks, Daren. Keep well, sir.
You too. Bye-bye.